I had lost I had a lack of boundaries. Didn't, I had lost my identity. I was constantly tired, exhausted, fatigued. And anybody could have told me, oh, well, you feel that way because you're a new mom.
Hey, teacher bestie. My name's Helena, and I'm the creator of the Present Teacher Podcast. I'm a first-year teacher coach, and in this podcast, you are going to learn everything from simple, actionable classroom management, social emotional learning, and teacher wellness strategies. You know that impact you want to make in the classroom? Well, we're going to make it happen here. Hey there, teacher besties. I have an amazing guest with me. Her name is Brittany, and I am so excited to get started. So, Brittany, welcome to the Present Teacher Podcast. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Helena, for having me on the podcast. But my name is Brittany Blackwell. I am a classroom teacher. I am a special educator, and I have been in education for 11 years. I am a previous special education coordinator, which I loved, but I actually returned back to the classroom after my first daughter was born because I was working way too much and I needed to focus on my family. A little bit about me. My husband and I have 5 kids together. So I am all about simplification, reducing overwhelm in any aspect, because if I didn't, I'd probably go crazy. But I dealt with a lot of heavy burnout, like personally, professionally. I did extensive research about self-care, personal and professional growth, all of that, stress management. And I actually began teaching teachers how to reduce that overwhelm. And as we entered the pandemic, I started sharing tips, tricks, all those sorts of things on TikTok. And what I found was there were a lot of teachers that were leaving the profession. And it really kind of struck a nerve with me because they were a lot of really, really good teachers, like really passionate educators. And I could think, I've been through that. I have totally lost myself to teaching before. And so I really started shifting my focus and started teaching educators everything that I researched from stress, burnout, simplification, boundaries, all that fun stuff that really isn't discussed in teacher prep programs with my agency, Teaching Mind, Body, and Soul. And then I began my podcast, the Resilient Teacher Podcast, in the summer of 2022 to reach and support more educators. So now that's what I do. I am a teacher resilience and retention strategist, and I help encourage and inspire overwhelmed teachers, leaders, schools, districts to prioritize mental health and individualize resilience and burnout recovery.
All of that is so amazing. A little backstory. Brittany actually invited me to be in one of my first conferences. It was Summer Self-Care Conference. And you guys, the energy she has and the passion for creating or preventing burnout for other teachers is just so inspiring. I just had to have her on here. So thank you so much, Brittany, for being a part of this, because honestly, you're one of the big reasons why the Present Teacher is here. So honored to have you on.
Oh, that's so cool.
So here on the Present Teacher, we like to talk about specifically our first years of teaching. I've kind of talked about my first year of teaching, but what was your experience like when you first walked into the classroom?
When I first walked into the classroom, I actually started out as a kindergarten teacher. I quickly found out really fast that that was not my jam. I was made for middle school and high school. That's just what I was made for. And so that first year was really difficult for me. It would probably be on a scale of 1 to 10, like 10 being the best, 1 being the worst. It was probably a 3. I felt very unprepared. I didn't really know what I was in for. I actually subbed before I took my position, and I actually took my position mid-year. So they added another class. I became the new kindergarten teacher, and I was super overwhelmed. I thought that I had to have everything in like a big binder. Like I thought I had to document everything. And then I was like, what do I do with these kids? There's kids with snot and poop, and I don't know what to do. So I was really overwhelmed. But that year was the year that I was like, I don't think this age is right for me. And so I actually went back and got my master's degree in special education. And I really wanted to just be able to reach all of the learners in my classroom. Like what I found was I only knew how to teach midway. I didn't know how to teach my lower learners, and I didn't know how to reach those high achievers. And so I went back and got endorsed in gifted and talented, and got my special education certification. And then I ended up doing something completely different, which was coordinating. So that was more my speed. But yeah, that first year, I was a doozy.
It's funny. I actually taught kinder my first year too. I think it's a rite of passage.
Yeah, I think it might be.
So I noticed you said that you would rate the overall experience a 3. What was the hardest thing you would say about that first year that made you feel overwhelmed?
I think just not being prepared. I feel like teacher prep programs don't they give you this kind of like very standardized way of this is how you've got to run a classroom. These are the classroom management strategies, all of these different things that make sense in general, but may not work or make sense to you as an individual. And so for me, it was not being prepared to be authentically myself in the classroom. I felt like I was having to be another person in order to show up in my classroom and do what good teachers do. So that was probably why the experience was not so great for me, because I didn't feel like I was prepared to be myself.
Yeah. How would you say you overcame that? Like, at what point did you realize that you could be authentically yourself as a teacher?
I think that happened probably, I would say, about 5 years ago. I taught for about 6 years before I even started to realize that I didn't even know who I was as a person anymore, because I had gotten sucked into this idea of, well, good teachers, they look like this, they sound like this, they act like this. And so I didn't wear my nose ring. I hid my tattoos. I use this I know this sounds weird, but I use this really cookie cutter voice that wasn't me. Like it wasn't me. And the kids knew that because I was not having those relationships with the kids that I have now. Like now that they know me and how I am and I know me, it's way easier to make those connections, make those relationships, not only with my students, but my colleagues, really everybody in the school now knows, okay, like that's Brittany. But before that, it was just like this idea that I had to be a certain way. And that just really didn't work for me.
Yeah. What do you feel like was the pressure, or what caused you to feel like you couldn't be authentically you in the classroom?
I think it was just the outside pressure of people in general, the way that people see teachers, the way that even in my teacher prep program, they would say things like, well, you've got to take your nose ring out. Like I had my nose ring since I was 16 years old, it's just me. You have to dress a certain way. The things that they told me in the teacher prep program set me up to believe, oh, this is the way that it is. Even going through my student teaching, like when I think about it, I'm like, all of the teachers that I worked with in my student teaching were a very particular type of teacher. Not to say that that's bad, that's them, but I put on myself this belief from hearing it from my professors or hearing it from other people outside. Teachers don't do that. Teachers don't do that. So when I saw this type of teacher, I thought, oh, that's what I have to be a good teacher. And the fact of the matter is that really that wasn't for me, but it's also not for everyone else either. Like you don't have to be a specific type of teacher in order to be effective, in order to make growth in your classroom, in order to, grow as an educator. You have to be yourself. You have to be who you are authentically. And I did that personally by just learning about myself, taking that time to really, okay, what do I like? I went to a therapist when I was in like severe burnout, I went to a therapist and she was like, tell me about yourself. And I was like, okay, I'm a teacher and a mom. Like I literally had no other thing to say about myself because I didn't know. I had no idea. She's like, well, what hobbies do you have? Hobbies. Hmm. Um, momming and teaching. Like, I don't
Yes.
know. And I feel like that's, again, another piece that teachers and teacher prep programs, they don't really focus on that. They don't focus on, well, figure out what you like. What do you like about teaching? What do you think you're going to like about teaching? What do you want to enjoy about teaching? What is your favorite thing to do when it comes to these classes where we have to do classroom management and making these lesson plans? Which one's your favorite? Oh, you like making creative lesson plans. Well, that's going to be like what you want to focus on. You want to focus on getting your energy from that because you have to have something that's going to energize you in such a very difficult teaching profession, you know?
Yes, absolutely. I 100% agree with you about the authenticity. For example, I had my nose ring and I had bright red hair. And
Mm-hmm.
as soon as I got my teaching job, my first one, I dyed it to brown because that's what everyone does. And
Yeah.
I agree that it feels like we can't be authentically us when we first walk in. It's
Mm-hmm.
definitely a journey.
Yeah.
Why did you start teaching? I like asking this question and seeing if I'm similar as to why you started teaching in the first place.
That's a really good question. Because what I started doing was from the time I was little until I got to college, I said I was going to be a lawyer. I was going to be an attorney. That's what I was going to do. I was going to be a politician. I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to Harvard Law School. That is what I'm doing. I watched way too much Legally Blonde. And then I got to college and I realized this is really boring. And this is really, I, at the time, was like, this is not me, you know? And what I did was I started working um, in an after school program and I started working with kids and I was like, wow, like I really enjoy hanging out with kids and actually getting to help them. Like to watch that little spark that they have, like when they get something, when they finally get something, it like lights me up. And really to this day, that still happens that way. Like, but it happens even more like than before because now I'm teaching teachers and I can see that happen with teachers too. You know, like I can see that light bulb moment go off where they're like, ding ding ding, like this is what I'm supposed to be doing or this is how you do it. And that feeling to me that I helped somebody to reach that point is amazing to me. Like I love that feeling.
Yeah, the teacher, that spark is everything, that light in their
Mm-hmm.
eyes. I feel the
Yes.
same way.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you name a time that you first felt burnout, or do you recall the first time that you realized, okay, maybe what I'm facing is burnout?
Well, probably about the time. See, what happened with me was that I wasn't just burned out professionally. I was, but I was also burned out personally. And I think that sometimes they can either be like comorbid, where they're happening together, or one causes the other. And I can't really tell you which one it was. Because I had lost I had a lack of boundaries. Didn't I had lost my identity. I was constantly tired, exhausted, fatigued. And anybody could have told me, you know, oh, well, you feel that way because you're a new mom. Like I had my first daughter and then my second daughter, that's when it happened, where I was just at the end of my rope. I was also going through a divorce. And that year, as luck would have it, like I had the most challenging class that I've ever had. They were amazing kids, but they were so challenging. And I felt like I didn't have the energy to give them. Like I could not come up with anything. I couldn't, my fuse was short. I wasn't acting like myself. Like I couldn't put on that face. That was when I realized, like, hey, I need to be a little bit more authentic because I couldn't put on that face. I couldn't put on that mask where I was like that teacher. And it was like this realization in that therapy appointment that I had that it was like, I really need to get to know who I am. Like, what do I stand for? What do I like? What am I good at? What am I not really good at? And how can I use my strengths to kind of overcome that? And really, just the knowledge or the self-awareness that I was dealing with all of these things all at one time, it was like, something's got to change, and it's got to be me, because it can't be everything else. Like, everything else is going to crap. No, 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 no. It's something's going on internally that I need to fix.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in the moment when you're looking and realizing that it's myself and I need to start falling in love with myself again, what were some of the boundaries? I heard you say boundaries, some of the boundaries that you felt like you weren't honoring, and what did that feel like for you?
So the boundaries that I didn't have were, I felt like because I like that spark, I guess. And that's just a new realization that I just had right now. But I was very codependent on, if I can't fix this person's problem. So for instance, I'm a special ed teacher. So if my student is really struggling with something and I can't help them, then I felt terrible about it. I felt like I was worthless. I wasn't doing what I was put here to do. And so one of the boundaries that I had to put up was that all of these things about, this is an emotional boundary, but like, all of these things about somebody else have nothing to do with me. And so if their feelings about themselves or their struggles are starting to impact me, then I need to step away and come back when I'm cleared out. That's just an emotional boundary that I had to set. And that really, honestly, that also impacted my previous marriage. Like, I thought that I had to fix the problems when it wasn't my problems to fix. I could totally be a supporter in that moment, but I couldn't fix those problems. Another boundary that I had to set was, I was constantly, like, as a new mom, I was after school all the time. I had left my position as a special education coordinator because I wanted more time with my family. Yet I was still staying after school, coming in early, just to get the things done that I needed to get done, or I thought that I needed to get done. And so I had to set it up where, no, now it's 4 o'clock every day. I leave. Whatever doesn't get done just doesn't get done. And later, I actually came up with ways to automate and simplify what I was doing in the classroom so that they didn't take up that much time, that I did have the time that I needed to take in order to get some of those things done that I felt like I needed to. But just that time boundary was another one. And then the other boundary that I set during that time period was not letting people's opinions of me get the best of me. Because again, like I've said it probably 100 times during this podcast, but I lost myself. Like, I didn't know who I was because I was trying to be what everybody else wanted me to be, or how I thought everybody wanted me to be. And so I had to put boundaries on what people's opinions were and what I allowed them to say to me about me. Like, if you're not going to say something positive, or like a positive criticism, like, I need to do A, B, or C, what do you think about that kind of thing? That's okay. I'm okay with that. But when you're telling me I need to do this, it's like, no, I need to tell you, no, that's just not for me. Thank you, though. Like, just not necessarily a negative or mean way of saying it, just no, no.
That's such a hard skill to learn too, saying no.
Hmm.
I don't know about you, but that one takes the longest, I feel, that confidence.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of gold things here, and I mean, oh, we could talk for hours. I heard you say about a time boundary as far as leaving work on time. You had some tips. If I was a first year teacher, or I was just walking into the classroom and I'm starting to realize, like, look, I have my identity as a mom or a family member, and I have my identity as a teacher, but I need to start creating this time boundary. What's like the first step you would take if you were to go back?
If I were to go back, the first step that I would take is, I would figure out what I would time block first. I would see in my day what times I have. And so some people have, like only one short little planning period, that sort of thing. And really cramming all of that really doesn't make a lot of sense, but creating a system for that. So what works for me is I have specific days of the week that I do specific tasks. And that makes sense to me because that the way that my day is set up. Now, it may not be set up like that for everybody, but for me it is. And I have 2 planning periods, which is like golden, fabulous, amazing. And I'm so thankful for that. But one of those is a lunch. And I typically don't take a whole 45 minutes to eat lunch. So 15 minutes, eat lunch, 30 minutes, here's what I'm doing right now. And over time, that every Monday I'm, checking for any out of date IEPs or when new IEP is due, or on Fridays I lesson plan. Just makes sense to me because then I don't have any time to sit there and Pinterest for hours, because I would do that. And so really just time blocking and then figuring out a system that works best for trying to get all those things done, but realizing that the to-do list is never going to end. It's always going to be there. There's never going to be a moment where you're like, I am completely done. No, that's not going to happen.
I agree with the Pinterest thing. I used to do the same thing.
Yes, hours on Pinterest.
Yes. And I think I completely agree with you. Setting an intentional schedule, it can be the difference between staying hours and being productive or maximizing your time a little more.
Yeah.
So in that moment when you realized that you didn't know yourself and you wanted to start taking action, what was the first thing you started doing? What was the first step you took towards that journey?
Going to therapy. Having somebody who was a non-biased person. I feel like sometimes people think that therapy is such a, like, it's so taboo in some places and sometimes. And so it feels like a weakness that you're going to a therapist. But in all reality, it was like in those sessions that I would have with her, she wasn't really doing anything. She was asking me questions and I was becoming aware. I was realizing these things about myself or about the situation. And it was like little light bulb moments. She would just ask me questions. She was never telling me anything to do, which I've had a therapist that's told me what to do. But at that point in time, she was just asking me questions. And then I started journaling and really kind of getting to the root of why I felt the way that I did, like what was working and what wasn't for me personally. And just taking that journey in self-discovery for me really allowed me to see a lot of the strengths that I had, that I wasn't really using, which I think is another big part of why I was burned out too. Not just overextending myself or trying to people please and all of that, but not allowing myself to flow naturally, what my gifts were, what my strengths were, and really recognizing those was pretty powerful for me. But journaling for me was just a big thing that I did, and it evolved over time. So originally it was like me asking myself questions about myself or writing things that were not working or were working. And then it kind of like transformed into this, what's my game plan? Like, what do I want this to look like? And then I started like vision casting or vision planning, which I talk a lot about like on my podcast. And I have a whole freebie for it. But that was like one of the things. It was like, wow, what do I want this to look like? What am I doing this for? And really connecting with those pieces of myself changed the whole trajectory of me teaching.
So, make sure to give me that freebie and I will put it in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely.
For those of us that don't know in general what vision planning and vision casting is, could you give like a quick summary of what it is?
Yeah. So vision planning is basically, so I don't like the idea so much of setting goals. I like to reframe them because our brain typically sees them as a threat. If we've said, oh, we're going to set this goal or we're going to set this New Year's resolution, right? Our brain sees it as a threat and it sends off a stress response in our bodies. And I don't want that. So, in kind of taking it a different direction, vision planning is where you're looking at what you want it to look like. What do you want out of a situation? What do you want your life to look like? And really becoming hyper focused and hyper aware of what it is that you're going for without making it sound so much like a goal, but more as a vision. So that when you, like, I have my vision board on my phone. I also have a different vision board on my laptop, and they're like cues to my brain that really remind me why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. On my phone, like, it's my kids, my family. It also has like, don't wait for an opportunity, create it. Like different things like that, that really remind me every time I pick it up or every time I open a laptop, these are the things that you're working for. This is what you want to do, or this is how you want to feel, because feeling is a huge piece of actually getting out and doing that action, right?
Well, so what's some results that you've seen? Has this changed your life in teaching or in your personal life? What are some of the transformations you've seen?
Yeah. So in my personal life, this is a really weird story, but I'm going to tell it anyways. So when I began journaling and vision planning, I didn't know my husband at the time. This is going to sound really weird, but it's also really true. So in July of 2020, I wrote a journal entry, and it was basically saying everything that I wanted in a relationship. I was divorced. I had 2 kids. And I knew it didn't work, right? I know exactly what didn't work, but I didn't want to focus on all of the negative things. If you focus on all of the negative things, you're just going to stay stuck in a pattern of negativity. So I wrote it as if I was already with the love of my life. I wrote down everything, literally everything that I could think of that I would want as if it had already happened. So my husband was going to be loving, caring, funny. He was like, I've showed it to my husband now because now I have this husband and it's that person. But I did that in like all different aspects. It wasn't just in relationships. I did it with like starting a business, changing my business, because actually I had a business, but I changed it into being more actionable content for teachers. And with my teaching, like I now have, like on my school laptop, I have a vision board that has all of the things that I'm working towards with teaching. What it's reminding me of is, I know everybody hates this phrase right now, but my why. Why am I doing this? Why am I waking up every morning and going to school and teaching these kids? Why am I doing that? And so it's different pictures, different quotes, different things like that, that really remind me of why I'm doing what I'm doing. So even in those really tough moments, I have that to look at.
I'm really glad you shared that story about your husband. I actually did something similar. I shared a story, or I shared with my dad what I wanted my future husband to be like, and I married Kyle. So here we are.
Yes, I love that. That just gave me goosebumps.
Yep. So not weird at all. I'm right there with you. So a lot of good things here. If I were a teacher who's like, you know what, I think I'm right there with you, or how you used to feel, I'm feeling burned out, what would you recommend the first steps or some actionable tips they could do?
Yeah. So one of the first things that I would recommend is, I would say that I don't believe that, burnout prevention or burnout recovery is a one size fits all thing. What works for one person may not really work for another person. And to be honest, that's why I created my signature framework for burnout recovery and resilience. And I call it the individualized educare framework, because I believe that every teacher is unique. We all have different strengths, different weaknesses, different preferences. So giving these one size fits all strategies and things like that really aren't going to help support educators. So inside the framework, there's 6 stages and steps that we go over to really help and find what works for us as individuals, so that we're not overextending ourselves, so that we're not getting completely stressed out. So the first step is really evaluation. And I'm not going to go into every step here, but the first thing I would recommend is discover our why or the triggers for our current stress or our unique burnout cycle. So this means taking like 15 minutes, making a list of all the things this year, the semester, or even like just the last month or week that really stressed us out, and really getting clear about that, thinking about the things that you're really stressed considering for the upcoming year even. Don't limit these things though to like school situations, because as you heard from my story, like oftentimes our out of work experiences can impact our burnout at work as well. So you can add any specific emotions to the list. You can categorize them into similar situations, but really the purpose of this exercise is just to make yourself aware of all the things that may have previously or you anticipate cause you to not end your stress cycle or perpetuate that stress cycle. And once we kind of have those root causes, which I'm going to be honest, like there can be a whole lot, we can then begin to kind of look deeper and take action that can mitigate that stress from those specific causes. The second thing that I would recommend is to develop healthy coping mechanisms. And I go way more in depth, like in my actual framework, but to kind of give something actionable you can do today, the most important development that you can make is just to develop a healthy coping mechanism to manage that stress and prevent that burnout. This can include exercise, meditation, deep breathing, other exercises that really help you to relax, activate that parasympathetic nervous system, and really reduce your stress levels. So all of those things that set our bodies up for appropriately processing that stress that is negatively impacting us. And then the third thing is to look back from that evaluation, that recognition of your stressors, and start setting those boundaries. Boundaries are super important for preventing burnout and maintaining a healthy work-life balance. And this can include just setting those limits on work hours, delegating tasks, saying no to unnecessary commitments, all of those types of things. I can tell you this, though. The absolute number one thing that is not going to get somebody out of burnout is telling themselves that it's just going to be okay. That's really not going to cut it. And I've always hated it when people would say, well, just don't think that, or just remind yourself it's going to be okay. You know, there's a reason that that doesn't work. The fact is that really completing the stress cycle is it's not an intellectual decision. It's really a physiological shift. Like we don't have to tell our lungs to keep breathing. We don't have to tell our stomach to digest food. You know, our body's going to do what it wants to do. So you can't really get out of burnout or complete the stress cycle through deliberate choice. You have to give your body what it needs to complete it in order to do what it's designed to do.
Yeah, that I feel like when you just tell yourself everything's going to be okay, it's almost like invalidating how you're feeling,
Yes.
not honoring it. And then you wonder why later it comes back up for you.
Yes.
He is charged of this, actually. So,
yes.
Going back to the awareness phase, what are some questions we can ask ourselves to kind of, get ourselves thinking what's causing us stress? So if I were to like journal, what are some prompts I could think about or start journaling on?
So there's 3 main prompts that I recommend everybody do first starting out. The first one is to think about what exactly your stressors are. Like, what is stressing you out? Like, label all of them. Is it your family? That's okay. I mean, honestly, things like that can stress you out. Really just making a list of everything that's stressing you out, and then what you're doing about it. Like, what are you doing about it right now? Are you just hoping that it'll go away? Are you Netflix and chilling because you're like, oh, this is gonna just all go away on its own? That's called disassociating. That's not gonna work. And then the third thing is to like ask yourself what you could do to help with your family situation. Like for me lately, I'm just being honest, my family is kind of stressing me out. We have a lot of kids and a lot of kids doing a whole bunch of different things, and it's the holidays. And so even yesterday, I took out my notebook. I'm like, okay, what is not working right now? What is not working? Well, it's not working is these kids. These kids are constantly pulling out toys and they're never putting them away. So what can I do? Like, what am I doing right now? Well, I'm just hoping that they'll figure it out that all these toys are all over the floor, right? And that's not working. So what can I do going forward? Well, I'm actually going to create a system in my, like how I do with teaching now in my house. And every day at a certain time, my kids are going to know this is the time that we're cleaning up our toys. We're getting all of these things up so that they have that routine ready for them, right? We do this in our classrooms all the time, but it's hard to do at home. And then they'll know that. I'll know that. I'll feel better about it. There won't be abandoned toys on the floor. And eventually, it may be difficult at first, but eventually it'll just become part of the routine. And then that won't be a problem anymore. You could do the same thing with like journaling. If you're not really a journaler and you're like, okay, well, she's talking about journaling. She's talking about doing these things. What can I do differently? Well, create just a 10-minute time every day. Block it out in your calendar. 10 minutes today. This is what I'm doing, and try it for 2 weeks. It may not do anything, but then again, it might change everything, you know?
I love that. It may not do anything, but it may change everything. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like there's this, I don't want to say stigma, but people feel like self-care and wellness is all like you try something and it works, but I feel like a lot of people don't talk about how it's kind of just one big experiment.
It is. It is one big experiment. Like, and you know, there's this negative connotation around self-care lately. Like I've even said it too. Like, you can't self-care your way out of burnout. No, you can't, but you can regulate your nervous system. And regulating your nervous system is half the battle in actually making progress towards burnout recovery. And like for me, I tried 512 different things, and different things worked at different times for me. But when I created a system that actually would allow me to evaluate, okay, what's going to work for me right now? Like that's kind of the whole purpose of my framework was I was like, you know what? Nobody knows what they're supposed to do. You get this self-care menu at a professional development. They're like, yeah, go do some self-care, and you do them and you don't feel any better, because you're adding more to your plate. You're not really taking things off of your plate in order to make room for yourself. Number two, you don't really know until you know your personality type, your values, your vision, all of those different things. You don't really know what's going to work for you in that moment. And so what worked for you 10 years ago or 5 years ago or 1 year ago may not be what you need in this current moment. And that's okay. It's okay to change things up. It's okay to, try something new, even if it sounds kind of kooky or weird, just to see, over 2 weeks, over a month, does this work for me? Oh, crap, it does. Look at that,
Yeah, I feel like it's definitely a journey, not a destination. It's not like one day your life is magically fixed and everything's rainbows and butterflies. It's very
Absolutely.
much like a journey of falling in love with yourself again. At least that's how
Yes.
I see it.
Yeah, I agree. Like that you can't, it's not a destination. It's like that Buddhist quote about happiness. Like happiness is not like it's not what you will have. You won't have this special moment where everything from that point on is happy. You're going to have these ebbs and flows, and you kind of have to just recognize, hey, this is the season that we're in. Next season will be better, or I'm going to change things up, and this is how I'm going to change for next season to be better.
Yeah. So if I was a teacher who is contemplating going to therapy, what would you tell me if I was on the fence about it? Maybe I'm a little nervous about therapy and how the whole process is.
Well, nowadays it is super easy to get therapy because now they have online therapists. And while that seems weird, it's especially for us in our generation or new teachers coming in, they've done this. They did classes on Zoom. They're aware of technology and how it works. There's this website called Headspace, and I actually have like a code for that I can send to you that you can give to your subscribers. But it's amazing because you don't ever have to worry about when it's going to fit into your schedule. You don't have to worry about, well, there's going to be this commute time to and from my therapist office. Or even if you have therapists near you, nowadays it is kind of difficult to get in to a therapist like in person. And so sometimes it's just easier to have that person that's online. But going to a therapist is not as scary as it sounds. It's not somebody judging you about what you're doing or what you're not doing. Like the whole idea of that profession, think about it like if that teacher or if that therapist is a teacher, like they got into that profession because they wanted to help people. They wanted to help people change their mental health, fix their issues, or, really come up with a plan that's going to work for them. And when you change your mindset about what a therapist is to like how you see yourself as a teacher may have gotten to teaching because they wanted to help kids, right? Like, I don't know any teacher that would have gotten into teaching for any other reason. But really changing your mindset about going and seeing a therapist is kind of crucial in doing that. But nowadays it's so easy to get into a therapist because there are online therapists.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I know when I first started going to therapy too, there was, like you said, the stigma or it's taboo and it's this bad thing. It's not. It's so eye-opening. And a lot of the times it's just them saying exactly what you know. It's just bringing it to that surface. So I agree. If you are thinking of it, definitely highly recommend. And if you have had bad experiences, I don't know if you've had a bad experience, but there may have been, people you didn't click with, try to find someone else because there's definitely someone out there for you that's going to help you change your life.
Yes.
So, if I were a first year teacher, if I were a first year teacher, what would you recommend I focus on in 2023?
The number one thing that I would recommend focusing on in 2023 is getting clear about your boundaries. Like really like just going hard on the boundaries, like really just being aware of your energy boundaries, your time boundaries, all of these different things so that you can kind of boundary work not only kind of helps you get out of burnout, but it also prevents burnout. Like if you're really focused on, okay, this one section of your life and you set a boundary there, it's like it can't get past it, right? And really learning to just say no when somebody asks you to do something, or to say, let me think about that and I'll get back with you if you're really not sure. Give it that 24-hour period where you're allowing yourself to kind of assess, are you available for that? Do you have the capacity for that? Do you, if somebody's asking you to do something, you don't want to just immediately say, yes, I can do that. Sure, I can do that. You want to give yourself that time to be like, do I have the time? Do I have the energy? And then kind of respond accordingly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. If I wanted to learn more about your 6-step framework, where would I go?
So you can find me. I love connecting with other educators, especially those who are like overwhelmed, looking for ways to kind of break the cycle of burnout, really reignite their passion for teaching. So if the listeners want to learn more from me, you can find me on Instagram. I am at Teaching Mind, Body, and Soul, or TikTok at Miss Princess Teach. But I also have my podcast, the Resilient Teacher Podcast, and my individualized educare program. If you catch it, it's IEP, like how we do for our students. But that is also on my website at teachingmindbodyandsoul.com. My podcast, the Resilient Teacher Podcast, I really wanted to change the narrative around resiliency because I felt like that was getting like a really bad rap. And it was being used to like gaslight teachers into not recognizing what's kind of wrong with our system. So I can't tell you how many times I heard, well, you need to be more resilient in some like really crappy situations. So the goal of my podcast is really to remind teachers that they are already resilient and lead them into making the change that we need to see in the system of education, because it's kind of broken. And the podcast is also for overwhelmed educators who want to get the support, the tools, the mindset to reduce teacher burnout and keep teaching sustainable. And I have a new episode go live every Tuesday, and I go in between with like how-to types and burnout recovery expert interviews. I talk all about the 6-step framework, all on there. So yeah, if there's any teachers out there who are struggling with stress, burnout, just overall sustaining their career, DM me, come hang out with me. Seriously, like I like to chat with other teachers about burnout, their journey, all that good stuff.
We do here too. Awesome. Well, I'll get all those links from you and I will put them in the show notes as well. So go ahead and look down below if you are a listener and you want to connect with Brittany. Brittany, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure to have you, and I definitely learned a lot, and I know the listeners did too.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. I hope that you were able to take away some value that will help you thrive inside and out of the classroom. It would mean the world to me if you could take 5 seconds right now and leave a review on this podcast. And if you found this podcast especially helpful, make sure to take a screenshot of this episode right now and tag me on your socials to let me know you're listening. As always, remember that we are stronger together with all the love in the world. Helena, aka the Present Teacher. See you next time, Teacher Bestie.